guys, welcome back to my channel. We're here today with a recent reads kind of video. I want to chat a little bit about the books that I have been reading recently. We are going to do a full recap at the end of the month, but I think we're also going to try that beat the clock exercise where I try to discuss the books that I have read throughout the month in 60 seconds each, 60 seconds or less. So some of the things that I want to tell you about the book, I won't be able to fit into that video. So even though we're close to the end of the month, we're still doing a recent reads. Hope that makes sense. So books that I have been finishing and books that I'm still reading, we'll chat a little bit about them. So first I want to talk about The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This is the fourth book that I have read from this author, and it's probably my least favorite of the books, just because I think the subject matter really impacts how you feel about nonfiction writing. So Erik Larson is a narrative nonfiction writer. So he takes a real story or real stories and he writes in a really immersive kind of fictional novel style, but it's all true. And some of the things that he's writing, you're like, how could he possibly know that? He addresses that at the end of the book. So I said that this was my least favorite of his books just because there's a part of the book that was... I don't even know if I want to revisit this now that I'm home by myself. Okay, so The Devil in the White City. The White City is a name that was given to the World's Fair in Chicago. And I don't want to tell you too much about the story just in case you want to go read this book for yourself, because I still recommend it. Recommend it highly. A solid 4-star rating for me. But yeah, so the title. The White City is the name given to the Chicago landscape that was constructed for the World's Fair in 1892, 1893, and it was around that time because it was to commemorate Christopher Columbus coming to the New World. So they had this expo, this World's Fair in Chicago, and so the city that they built was called the White City. The devil is a man who was preying upon people. It's a serial killer, essentially, working around this same time. And so those two things were happening at the same time, even if they weren't completely intertwined. They were. So this book, as much as you love the architecture and the very uplifting things that were happening, there's also the flip side of, you know, going into this serial killer's mind and seeing some of the things that was happening. He even wrote a memoir about what he was accused of doing, or his story. And so Larson uses lots of different kinds of medium to do his research, and it is very evident. This is a big book. It is a little over 400 pages, including notes, which I read some of the notes. I didn't read all of them. The text itself, I think, ends around 380s, 379 thereabouts. You don't need to know that exactly. But I love Erik Larson's writings. So other books that I have read from him include The Splendid and the Vile, which tells the story of Winston Churchill around World War II in England. You know, Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of England around the time that England got into the war. And a little bit about Churchill and Roosevelt. Was it FDR at the time? And America's getting involved in the war, that kind of thing. That was my favorite book. I think that was my first book that I read from him. And it was my favorite because I buddy read it with Patrice and Doris and Heidi. And that discussion really lent itself to the experience of reading a book like this. Like, you're learning so much information. And while I was reading this book, I was having discussions about the history with my husband, because, you know, he's a social studies teacher, very interested in history. He's been to Chicago. I have not. I've driven past Chicago, but I've never been to the city. And so we had discussions about what the innovations were at this time. And I don't want to tell you too much about the story because I want you to experience it yourself. Like, how can I say this? I'm still recommending, did I say that already? I'm still recommending the book. Highly, highly recommending the book. Especially if you're not a scaredy cat like me. Where you can read about a man preying on women and not be scared. feel like I've said this before, but I really love the book, really love the discussion of architecture. There are lots of famous names that are associated with what happened with the World's Fair. One of the principal architects, principal committee leaders, committee heads, the people or the teams that assembled to really innovate this World's Fair include Daniel Burnham, who's a big architect, helped develop city urban planning, developed from this. Olmsted, who helped to develop Central Park. He was into landscape architecture, and so he was one of those people who helped to develop Central Park, even though that came before the World's Fair. And other names that are associated either with the fair or associated with people who worked in the fair include Frank Lloyd Wright. His name is mentioned here. And yeah, lots of things, just like lots of things. There are lots of really very intriguing and interesting historical elements that came about around this time. And I was here for that. I got scared with the other stuff. So, finished that and loved it and want to put the book away now. And this is a big win for me because I read this because I put it on a challenge, book challenge by Erin, that I'm participating in on Facebook. But also, it came from my shelves. I bought this book from Book of the Month Club a couple of years ago now, and it had been sitting on my shelves for a while. So I finally read another book from my shelves. So I'm moving on up towards completing my challenge of reading 25 books from my shelves before I can buy any more. I don't know. So then, I was also buddy reading this with Columbus and Rosalie. This is Winesburg, Ohio by Sherwood Anderson. And it is about the characters in this town, Winesburg, Ohio. And it's short stories that tell the story of a town. So while the stories aren't completely linked, there are some characters that appear in several stories. And so at the end of the book, did I mention? Finish the book. And we do have a principal character, this young man named George Willard, who is a reporter in the town. And he's a young man. We meet him when he's a teenager. And I think he's in his early 20s when the book ends. Like early 20s or maybe even still late teens. I don't know. But he's the person who goes around and writes stories about his townspeople, his fellow residents. And yeah, we really explore life in a smallish town and how a lot of the residents seem to be people who had dreams, had aspirations, whether dreams for romance and their romantic lives or ambitions for career or financial success. And a little bit about how a lot of those dreams died in this town without being realized, but it helped to fuel the ambitions for the other people, the next generation, or the people that they came in contact with. So I love the exploration of the different characters, and I feel like we get representations of lots of different kinds of people who would inhabit every town. So you'd probably see people in these stories that you recognize, no matter where you're from. You know, the lady who is very attractive, but never married, and nobody knows why she became what they call an old maid, or the school marmish kind of character in this book. The rich man and the rich man's daughter who everyone wants to be with because of what they think they will get by being with her, and then the person who she may love, and their relationship is a lot more equal, but that relationship doesn't seem like it's going far just because he's not rich himself. That kind of thing. Like, this feels like the kind of every man's story, and yet the writing was just so beautiful in so many places, just like really, really vivid imagery. Like, even if the characters don't feel like they're linked and you might not remember their individual stories, like little details I think will stick with me. So yeah, really, really love this book. Really love this writing. This is Winesburg, Ohio by Sherwood Anderson. So very happy that I read that. So those are the two books that I finished since the last time we talked. I'm still reading Diasporican by Ileana Maisonet. This is a Puerto Rican woman. She lives in the United States. She lives in California. And so the book is written for and maybe dedicated to people who have Puerto Rican heritage but don't live in Puerto Rico. And so she calls them the ni de aquí, ni de allá, not from here, not from there. People who are the 5.5 million people living stateside who continues to cook the food of our homeland, Puerto Rico. This is for the tribe. So she says in the beginning, so she says in her introduction to the book, this is not a Puerto Rican cookbook. This book is for the diasporicans, the 5.5 million people living stateside who continue to cook the food of our homeland. This is for the tribe of ni de aquí, ni de allá, not from here, not from there. So, love this. I love her dedication to taking her Puerto Rican heritage and transmitting it to the rest of the world. So I love that there are things in here that aren't, like, they don't seem like they're fancy. Like there's a pot of beans, right? Pot of beans. Nina Didi's beans, she calls them. You say you can use any type of bean for this recipe, and that's the other thing I love about the recipes, that she makes them approachable. So even if you don't have this particular thing, here are some things that you can use as substitutes. And I love the description of how things came about. So this book is part memoir, part cookbook, and we're reading it for the Run Right Reads book club. So we had our discussion, and Alba from Siriella, who's Puerto Rican and lives in Puerto Rico, and Lisa, she's on Instagram as Literary Latina X, and she's also from Puerto Rico. And then there was me and others of us who are not Puerto Rican but have an appreciation or want to have an appreciation for this kind of display of the heritage, and loved it. So I love that she shows or showcases the elements of the culture, the things that are traditional, and also how you could build on them, how people can build on them. And her wit and her attitude, her personality really shines through. The author's personality really shines through in this writing. And I love that the pictures, they are not necessarily your typical cookbook pictures, but they are about life. And she talks about the life in Puerto Rico and the politics in Puerto Rico, including the politics of food, why certain foods are available in Puerto Rico and other countries, why things are imported there, cost less than locally grown things, and why that is, and the politics of why that is, and how sometimes eating can be political. And then there are the the pictures that you expect, the typical cookbook pictures. But this is a lot about her love for her culture and her love of food, and a lot of the discussion of what eating does for us and how it builds our communities, and what she got from her family, the lessons of love for food. And yeah, there's a lot in this book. I wanted to show you a picture. I showed you the picture of the pig. So she has traditional dishes in here, traditionally prepared things. This is lechon. So there's a big section of the book that is devoted to showing how the pig is roasted, and so you could see real pictures of this event of preparing this hog to be roasted. Love that book. So I'm still reading it. I'm not done, but I will continue reading that, and hopefully I'll wrap it up by tomorrow. So those are the physical books that I have been reading thus far. I'm also reading The God of Good Looks by Brie McIver, and I'm reading that in galley form from NetGalley. And so I mentioned that before. So I'm not done. I don't really have much more to tell you. So I'll say that I'm still reading it. Hopefully I'll be finished by tomorrow, so I can include that in my wrap up for the month. So yeah, those are the books that I have been reading. I'm also still reading Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, reading that aloud here on BookTube. I don't think I'm going to finish that by the end of this month, but we'll continue. We'll keep on with those videos. So yeah, that's my reading thus far. I still have tons of books on my TBR that I didn't get to yet, and I don't know how many of those I can complete before the end of the month. So we'll just have to stay tuned and see how the rest of this month shakes out. So thank you so much for watching this video. It is live. It is not going to be edited. So ignore all the flubs. And we'll be back for another video, hopefully a little bit more editing, a little bit more sophisticated of a video. But I just wanted to come on here and let you know what I've been reading, and let me know in the comments down below what you've been reading, and we'll talk about that. So until we come back for that next video, happy reading. Bye.